The Vakran Empire had been conquering the galaxy for 300 years. Their warships were massive, their weapons powerful, and their armies unstoppable. They had taken over 2,000 star systems. Every species they encountered either surrendered immediately or was destroyed within days. The Vakran had never lost a battle. Not once in 3 centuries. Their method was simple and brutal. A fleet of warships would arrive at a planet, demand surrender, and if the answer was no, they would attack. Most civilizations saw the size of the Vakran fleet and gave up without fighting. Those who resisted were crushed so quickly that others learned not to try. Fear was the Vakran's greatest weapon, and it had served them well. Captain Daniel Hayes sat in the command chair of the USS Defiant, a small frigate that patrolled the outer edges of human territory. He was 42 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too many long shifts. He had been in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years, and most of that time had been quiet. Boring, even. Humanity had expanded to dozens of worlds, but they had been lucky enough to avoid major conflicts. Until now. The Defiant was not a warship built for combat. It was a patrol vessel, designed to watch for pirates and scan asteroid fields for valuable minerals. The ship carried a crew of 85 people, most of them young and inexperienced. They had trained for emergencies, but none of them had ever seen real battle. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan stood next to Daniel's chair, studying the sensor display. She was 35, efficient, and always prepared. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her uniform was perfectly pressed even after a 12-hour shift. She had been Daniel's second-in-command for 3 years, and he trusted her judgment completely. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Lisa said, her voice calm but alert. "Multiple wormhole signatures opening near the asteroid belt." Daniel leaned forward. "How many?" 12 contacts, large ones, very large." Lisa's fingers moved across her console, pulling up more data. "Sir, these readings match Vakran warship signatures." The bridge went silent. Every crew member turned to look at the main view screen. They had all heard the stories about the Vakran. Everyone in the galaxy had. But the Vakran had never come to this part of space before. Humanity was far from the Empire's borders, isolated and unimportant. "Sound general quarters," Daniel ordered. "Get me a visual as soon as possible." The alarm began to blare throughout the ship. Crew members ran to their battle stations. In engineering, Chief Engineer Peter Collins checked the reactor levels and began routing power to shields. In the medical bay, Dr. Helen Carter prepared for possible casualties. At the tactical station, Lieutenant Kyle Bennett activated the weapon systems and began running targeting diagnostics. The view screen flickered and showed the incoming fleet. 12 massive ships emerged from the wormholes, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. The smallest Vakran vessel was 3 times the size of the Defiant. The largest was like a floating city, bristling with weapons and armored plating. "They're heading straight for New Portland," Lisa said, checking their course. Daniel felt his stomach drop. New Portland was a colony world, established only 30 years ago. It had cities, farms, schools, and families. It had no military defenses except for 3 small space stations. Against a Vakran fleet, those stations would last minutes, at most. "Communications, contact Fleet Command," Daniel ordered. "Tell them we have a Vakran invasion force entering Sector 7. Lieutenant Jake Morrison worked his console frantically. "Sending now, sir." "But the nearest battle group is 6 hours away. The closest destroyer is 4 hours out." 4 hours. Daniel looked at the tactical display. The Vakran fleet would reach New Portland in 90 minutes. There was no time for reinforcements. No time for evacuation. No time for anything except what was right in front of them. "Sir, the Vakran are accelerating," Kyle reported from Tactical. "They just destroyed Defense Station Alpha. Station Beta and Gamma are firing, but their weapons aren't even scratching the Vakran shields." On the view screen, Daniel watched as the two remaining stations launched everything they had. Missiles, energy beams, and railgun rounds all struck the Vakrin ships. None of it mattered. The Vakrin shields absorbed the attacks easily, and then the stations exploded into clouds of debris. Hundreds of Defense Force personnel died in seconds. They're not slowing down, Lisa said quietly. They'll be in orbit of New Portland in 70 minutes. Daniel stood up from his chair and walked to the view screen. Behind him, his crew waited for orders. The Defiant had 40 missiles, 2 particle beam cannons, and shields that could withstand maybe 3 or 4 hits from Vakrin weapons. Against 12 warships that had conquered half the galaxy, they had no chance. Captain? Lisa stepped closer, lowering her voice. It was the logical choice. The smart choice. One small ship couldn't stop a Vakrin fleet. Running away would save the crew. They could fight another day, in another battle, with proper support. Daniel thought about New Portland. He had visited there once, 5 years ago. He remembered walking through the capital city, seeing children playing in parks, and people going about their lives. He remembered the hope in their faces, the pride they had in building something new. 15 million people who had done nothing wrong except live in the path of an empire that took whatever it wanted. "Get me fleet-wide communications," Daniel said. Jake opened the channel. Every crew member on the Defiant could hear what their captain was about to say. "This is Captain Hayes. You all know what's happening. The Vakrin are heading for New Portland, and we're the only ship in range. I won't lie to you. We can't win this fight, but we can slow them down. We can buy time for the colony to evacuate. Every minute we hold that fleet's attention is a minute that transports can launch, that families can escape, that lives can be saved." He paused, looking around the bridge at his crew. Young faces, scared but determined. They had joined the Defense Force knowing that someday they might be called to do something hard. That day had come. "I'm not ordering anyone to stay. If you want to evacuate to the shuttle bay, do it now. I won't think less of you. This is suicide, and you all know it. But someone needs to stand up to the Vakrin. Someone needs to show them that humanity doesn't run. If we do nothing, 15 million people will die. If we fight, maybe we save some of them. Maybe we save a lot of them." Daniel waited. The seconds stretched out. He half expected crew members to leave their stations, to head for the escape pods. He wouldn't blame them. He was asking them to die. Nobody moved. Lisa stepped up beside him. "The crew stays, Captain. All of us." Peter's voice came through from engineering. "Reactor is online and ready. I can push it past safety limits if you need more power." Kyle checked his weapons. "Targeting systems locked. I've been studying Vakrin tactics. I think I found a weakness in their formation." Dr. Carter's calm voice followed. "Medical bay is prepared for casualties." Around the bridge, every crew member nodded or spoke up. They were staying. All 85 of them had just chosen to face impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. Daniel felt something break inside his chest and reform into something harder. Pride, fear, determination. All of it mixed together into a single purpose. "Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget," he said. "Helm, set intercept course. All hands. Battle stations. This is the USS Defiant, and we're going to war." The Defiant moved through space toward the Vakrin fleet. Inside the ship, every crew member worked at maximum speed to prepare for the battle ahead. They had perhaps 40 minutes before weapons range, and those minutes had to count. Peter Collins stood in the engine room, his hands moving across control panels that glowed with orange and blue light. He was 38 years old, a career engineer who had spent 15 years keeping ships running. He knew the Defiant's systems better than anyone alive. Right now, he was pushing those systems further than they were ever meant to go. Rerouting power from non-essential systems, he called out to his engineering team. "Life support stays on minimum. Gravity generators down to 60%. Everything else goes to weapons and shields. His assistant, junior engineer Amy Price, looked worried. She was only 23, fresh out of the academy. Chief, if we push the reactor this hard, we could have a containment failure. If we don't push it this hard, we'll all be dead anyway, Peter said, not unkindly. Monitor the plasma flow. If it spikes above level 8, route it through the secondary coolant system. Amy nodded and got to work. Around them, the engine room hummed with dangerous levels of energy. Warning lights flashed on several panels, but Peter ignored them. Safety protocols were written for normal operations. This was anything but normal. On the bridge, Kyle Bennett studied every piece of data the Defense Force had on Vakran tactics. There wasn't much. Most species that fought the Vakran didn't survive to write reports, but there were a few records, scattered observations from ships that had escaped or witnessed battles from a distance. Kyle was 29, thin and quiet, with dark hair and glasses he refused to replace with surgery. He had always been better with computers than people. Now his ability to analyze patterns might be the only advantage they had. Captain, I think I found something, Kyle said, bringing up a tactical display. The Vakran always use the same formation. Their biggest ships in the center, smaller vessels on the flanks. It's effective because they rely on overwhelming firepower. Minity, Arcanar. Daniel came to stand behind Kyle's station. What's the weakness? They don't expect anyone to get close. Their formation is designed to destroy targets at range. If we can get inside their formation, their big ships will have trouble targeting us without hitting each other. Their weapons are too powerful for close quarters fighting. Lisa frowned. That means getting through their outer ships first. We'd take heavy damage just reaching the center. Yes, ma'am, Kyle agreed. But once we're there, we'd have maybe 2 or 3 minutes where they can't effectively coordinate their fire. We could do real damage in that time. Daniel studied the display. It was a desperate plan. But everything about this situation was desperate. How do we survive long enough to get close? Oh no. The nebula, Kyle said, highlighting a cloud of gas and dust near their current position. We use it for cover on our approach. They won't get a clean targeting lock until we're closer, and I recommend we focus all our fire on one ship at a time. We can't destroy them. But we might be able to damage their sensors or weapons. Do it, Daniel said. Lisa, coordinate with Kyle on the attack pattern. I want every advantage we can get. In the medical bay, Dr. Helen Carter prepared for the worst. She was 51, the oldest member of the crew, with gray hair and steady hands that had treated everything from broken bones to radiation poisoning. She had served on 3 different ships during her career, but she had never prepared for casualties on this scale. Stock every trauma kit, she told her 2 medical assistants. Set up emergency triage areas in cargo bays 2 and 3. If the medical bay gets hit, we need backup locations. Her assistants worked quickly, moving supplies and setting up portable surgical units. Helen tried not to think about how many crew members might need her help in the next few hours. Tried not to think about how many she wouldn't be able to save. Jake Morrison sat at the communications station, his fingers typing rapidly. He was 26, red-haired and freckled, always quick with a joke to lighten the mood. Right now, though, his face was serious. He was sending messages to New Portland, coordinating with the colony's emergency response teams. Captain, I have the colony administrator on screen, Jake said. A woman's face appeared on the view screen. She looked exhausted and terrified. This is Administrator Walsh. Captain, we're starting evacuations, but we have 15 million people. Even if every transport ship we have runs continuously, we can't get everyone off in time. How many can you evacuate in 1 hour? Daniel asked. Walsh consulted someone off-screen. Maybe 2 million if we're lucky. We're loading people as fast as we can, but there aren't enough ships. We never built enough ships. Her voice cracked slightly. Then we buy you more time, Daniel said. Every minute we keep that fleet busy, is another 1,000 people on transports. Focus on children and families first. We'll do everything we can. Thank you, Captain. All of New Portland thanks you. The screen went dark. Lisa looked at Daniel. 2 million out of 15 million. That's all we can save? That's 2 million more than would survive if we did nothing, Daniel said. It has to be enough. The Defiant reached the nebula and slipped inside. The cloud of gas surrounded them, hiding them from the Vakrin sensors. Kyle used the time to make final adjustments to the targeting systems. Peter coaxed even more power from the reactor. Helen finished her preparations in medical. Everyone waited for the moment they would emerge and face the enemy. Captain, the Vakrin fleet is 20 minutes from New Portland orbit, Lisa reported. If we're going to intercept them, it needs to be now. Daniel took a deep breath. He thought about his crew. All 85 people who had chosen to stay. He thought about his family back on Earth, his sister and her 2 kids, who he hadn't seen in years. He thought about all the things he would never do, the life he would never live. Then he pushed those thoughts away. There would be time for regrets later, if later ever came. All hands, this is the captain, we're going in. Remember your training, trust your teammates, and know that what we're doing today matters. Helm, take us out of the nebula. Full speed to intercept position. Kyle, weapons free. As soon as we're in range, the Defiant burst from the nebula cloud like a dart from the shadows. The Vakrin fleet was 2,000 kilometers ahead, still moving toward New Portland. For a few seconds, the enemy didn't react. They weren't expecting an attack. No one attacked the Vakrin. Then their sensors registered the small human ship, and everything changed. They're turning toward us, Lisa said. All 12 ships are changing course. Kyle's hands moved across his console. Firing solution locked. Targeting the lead battlecruiser's shield generator. All weapons. Firing now. The Defiant's 40 missiles launched in a single salvo, followed by continuous fire from both particle beam cannons. The weapons crossed the distance in seconds and struck the Vakrin battlecruiser's shields. Explosions bloomed across the energy barrier as the missiles detonated. The particle beams focused on a single point, drilling into the shield like a laser cutting through metal. For one brief, impossible moment, the shield flickered. The concentrated fire was too much for the generator to handle. A gap appeared, and 3 missiles got through, striking the battlecruiser's hull. They exploded against the armor, leaving black scars on the alien metal. We hit them, Kyle said, his voice filled with disbelief. Actual hull damage. Minor. But it's there. The Vakrin response was immediate and overwhelming. All 12 ships opened fire at once. The space between the fleets filled with plasma bolts, energy beams, and missiles. Hundreds of weapons all targeting one small frigate. Evasive maneuvers, Daniel shouted. Peter, I need those shields at maximum. The Defiant rolled and dove, trying to avoid the incoming fire. But there was too much of it. The first hits struck the forward shields, making the whole ship shake. Warning alarms blared across the bridge. Forward shields down to 70%, Lisa called out. Multiple hits on port side. Shields holding but barely. More impacts followed. The Defiant's shields lit up like a star as energy weapons struck them again and again. Inside the ship, crew members held onto their stations as the vessel shuddered under the assault. Return fire, Daniel ordered. Don't let up. Kyle, target their sensor arrays. If we can blind them, we have a better chance. The Defiant's weapons fired continuously, even as the ship took more damage. They were like a small dog fighting a pack of wolves, snapping and biting even while being torn apart. But they were still fighting, still standing. And on New Portland, transport ships began lifting off by the dozens, carrying thousands of refugees to safety. The battle had been going for 2 hours, and the Defiant was dying. Slowly, painfully, but dying all the same. The ship's hull was scarred with blast marks. 3 decks were exposed to space, and the shields were barely holding. But somehow, impossibly, they were still fighting. Daniel gripped his command chair as another volley of plasma bolts struck the ship. The bridge lights flickered, and sparks flew from a damaged console. His uniform was torn, his face covered in sweat and soot, but his eyes remained focused on the tactical display. "Status report," he called out. Lisa consulted her console, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Forward shields at 18%. Port shields completely gone. We have hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 9. Casualty reports coming in from all sections." "How many?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 14 dead, 23 wounded. Lisa's voice was tight. "Medical is overwhelmed. 14 dead. 14 crew members who had trusted him, who had chosen to stay and fight." Daniel felt each loss like a physical weight, but he couldn't stop now. Couldn't let their deaths be meaningless. "Jake, what's the status of the evacuation?" Jake Morrison turned from his communications station, his face pale but determined. "New Portland reports 8 million civilians evacuated so far. They're loading the transport ships as fast as they can. Administrator Walsh says they need another hour to get everyone off the planet." "Another hour?" Daniel looked at the tactical display. The Vakreen fleet had stopped advancing toward New Portland. Instead, all 12 ships were focused entirely on destroying the Defiant. The small human ship had become an insult to their pride, a challenge they couldn't ignore. "Kyle, how are we on weapons?" Daniel asked. "Down to 6 missiles. Particle beams operating at 40% power. Targeting systems are glitching but still functional." Kyle's voice was hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. "Sir, I don't think we can keep this up much longer." "We keep it up as long as we have to," Daniel said. Peter's voice came through the communication system from engineering, rough and tired. "Running at 130% of rated capacity. We're way past safe limits, Captain. The containment field is holding, but I can't promise it'll stay that way. We're also leaking coolant from the secondary system. If we don't shut down soon, we risk a core breach. How long can you give me?" There was a pause. Peter knew what Daniel was really asking. How long until the reactor exploded and killed everyone on board? Maybe an hour, maybe less. It's hard to predict when we're taking this much damage. An hour. The same amount of time the colony needed. It almost felt like fate. "Do what you can, Peter. We're not done yet." In engineering, Peter stood in front of the reactor core, watching the power levels climb. The room was hot, far hotter than it should be, and the air smelled of burning insulation and coolant. His hands were burned from manually rerouting power conduits when the automatic systems failed. Around him, his engineering team worked frantically to keep the ship running. Amy Price rushed over, her uniform singed and her face smudged with grease. "Chief, coolant pressure is dropping on the port side. If it drops any further, we'll lose the whole plasma relay system." "I'll handle it," Peter said. "You focus on keeping the power flow stable to the weapons. The captain needs those guns working." He moved to a maintenance panel and pulled it open. Behind it, a maze of pipes and conduits glowed with barely contained energy. One of the coolant lines had cracked, spraying blue fluid across the deck. Peter grabbed a repair kit and started sealing the crack, even as the hot pipe burned through his gloves. On the bridge, the Defiant continued its desperate dance through space. The ship wasn't fast, wasn't maneuverable, but Daniel and his crew had learned its limits and were pushing right to the edge. They used asteroid debris for cover, made micro-jumps to unpredictable positions, and exploited every second when the Vakreen ships blocked each other's line of fire. "Incoming missiles," Lisa warned. 20 contacts. Impact in 15 seconds. Launch countermeasures," Daniel ordered. "Helm, roll to starboard and dive. Kyle, target those missiles with point defense." The Defiant's small defensive guns fired at the incoming missiles, destroying 6 of them. The countermeasures fooled 8 more, but 6 missiles got through, slamming into the ship's weakened shields and hull. The bridge rocked violently. One console exploded, sending the crew member flying backward. "Man down!" Lisa shouted, rushing to help the injured officer. "Medical team to the bridge!" Dr. Carter's voice came through immediately. "I'm sending someone. But you need to know, medical bay is at capacity. We're treating wounded in the corridors." The injured officer was Navigation Officer Chris Palmer. He was 24, had joined the crew just 6 months ago, and had talked constantly about the girl he planned to marry when his tour of duty ended. Lisa checked for a pulse and found none. His station had exploded right in front of him. "He's gone," Lisa said quietly, closing Chris's eyes. 2 crew members moved him away from the bridge, and someone else took over navigation. There was no time to mourn. Not yet. Daniel forced himself to focus. "Kyle? Status on the Vakrin fleet? 2 of their ships have sustained damage to their sensor arrays. They're relying on data from the other ships for targeting. The flagship, that big one in the center, is coordinating their attacks. Captain, if we could take out the flagship's communications, it would disrupt their whole formation. Can we do it? Maybe. But we'd have to get close. Very close. And we'd have to hit them with everything we have left." Daniel looked at the tactical display. The Vakrin flagship was twice the size of any other ship in their fleet. A massive warship that bristled with weapons. Getting close to it would mean flying through a storm of fire. The Defiant probably wouldn't survive the approach, let alone the attack. "How much time until the evacuation is complete?" Daniel asked. 43 minutes, Jake replied. "They're on the last group of transports now. 43 minutes. They had already lasted 2 hours against impossible odds. What was another 43 minutes? We go for the flagship," Daniel decided. "Kyle, plot an attack course. Lisa, reroute all remaining shield power to the forward section. We're going straight at them." Lisa turned to look at him. "Daniel, that's suicide. This whole battle has been suicide," he replied. "But we're still here. Let's make it count." The Defiant turned toward the Vakrin flagship. The ship's remaining engines pushed them forward, building speed. The flagship, a vessel called the Crimson Sovereign, seemed to recognize the threat and focused its weapons on the approaching human ship. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled the space between them. The Defiant's forward shields took hit after hit, the energy barrier glowing brighter with each impact. Warning alarms screamed across the bridge. "Forward shields failing," Lisa called out. 20%. 15. 10. "Hold course," Daniel commanded. "Kyle, get ready to fire everything on my mark." The distance closed. 1,000 meters. 800. 500. The Defiant was so close now that the flagship filled the entire view screen. A mountain of metal and weapons. "Fire!" Daniel shouted. The Defiant's last 6 missiles launched, followed by a continuous beam from both particle cannons at maximum power. The weapons struck the flagship's communication array, a cluster of antennas and sensors near the bridge section. The missiles exploded in sequence, each one weakening the structure. Then the particle beams cut through, slicing into the equipment like knives. The communication array exploded, debris scattered into space, and the flagship's coordination with the rest of the fleet went silent. But the victory came at a cost. The forward shields collapsed completely under the return fire. A Vakrin plasma bolt struck the Defiant's hull directly, punching through 3 decks. The ship shuddered, atmosphere venting from the breach. "Hull breach on deck 4, Lisa reported. "Emergency bulkhead sealing. We've lost that entire section." In engineering, alarms blared as the damage reports came in. Peter watched his displays in horror. They had lost the secondary coolant system. The reactor temperature was climbing rapidly. "Captain, this is engineering," Peter said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We have a serious problem. The reactor is overheating. I can keep it stable for maybe 20 more minutes." But after that, I can't guarantee containment. 20 minutes. They needed 43 for the evacuation. Peter, I need you to give me more time, Daniel said. I'll do what I can, sir. Engineering out, Peter looked at his team. They were exhausted, burned, and terrified. But they were still working, still fighting to keep their ship alive. Amy, help me reroute the emergency coolant. If we can bypass the damaged system, we might buy another 10 minutes. That's a manual operation, Amy said. Someone would have to go into the maintenance tunnel. The radiation levels there are already critical. Peter grabbed a radiation suit from the emergency locker. Then I better hurry. Peter Collins climbed into the maintenance tunnel, wearing the radiation suit, knowing he was likely walking to his death. The tunnel was narrow, hot, and filled with warnings that flashed red in the darkness. Radiation levels here were enough to kill a person in minutes, even with protection. But if he didn't repair the coolant system, the reactor would breach and kill everyone on the ship instantly. He crawled through the tunnel, dragging tools behind him. The radiation counter on his suit climbed steadily. His hands shook. Whether from fear or radiation exposure, he couldn't tell. Behind him, Amy's voice came through the radio. Chief, radiation levels are at 60 rads and climbing. You need to work fast. I know, Peter said, reaching the damaged coolant junction. He could see the problem immediately. A plasma bolt had melted through the outer hull and severed 2 major coolant lines. Blue fluid was still leaking from the break, pooling on the floor of the tunnel. Peter got to work, his burned hands moving as quickly as he could manage. He sealed one line, then the other, using emergency patches that would hold just long enough. His radiation counter hit 90 rads. At this level, he was already sick, already dying. Coolant lines sealed, Peter reported. Rerouting flow through the emergency system now. On his display in engineering, Amy watched the reactor temperature begin to drop. Not much, but enough. They had bought maybe another 20 minutes. It's working, Chief. Get out of there now. Peter started crawling back through the tunnel. His muscles felt weak, his vision blurred. The radiation counter showed 115 rads. Lethal dose. But he kept moving, one hand in front of the other, focused only on getting back to his team. On the bridge, Daniel watched the tactical display as the Vakrin fleet scrambled to adjust. Without their flagship coordinating attacks, the other 11 ships were firing independently, their attacks less organized and easier to predict. It wasn't much of an advantage. But in a battle this desperate, anything helped. The flagship is trying to restore communications, Kyle reported. They're using backup systems. We probably have 10 minutes before they're fully coordinated again. Then we use those 10 minutes, Daniel said. Target the smaller ships. Hit their engines and weapons. We can't destroy them, but we can slow them down. The Defiant, battered and bleeding atmosphere, continued its attack. The ship was barely holding together. Life support was failing in 3 sections. The engines were running on emergency power, and half the weapon systems were offline. But the remaining guns still fired, and the ship still moved. In Medical Bay, Dr. Carter worked on her 17th patient of the day. The young crew member had severe burns across his chest from an exploding console. She cleaned the wounds, applied synthetic skin, and injected pain medication. Around her, 20 other wounded crew members waited for treatment. Some would survive. Some wouldn't. Jake Morrison came into medical, helping a crew member who could barely walk. The man's leg was badly broken, bone visible through torn skin. Helen pointed to an empty space on the floor, and they laid him down as gently as possible. How bad is it out there? Helen asked, already knowing the answer would be terrible. Bad, Jake said simply. But we're still fighting. Captain says 20 more minutes, and the evacuation will be complete. 20 minutes. Helen looked around at her overflowing medical bay and wondered how many more wounded she would see in that time. How many more would die before this was over? On New Portland, The evacuation was reaching its final stages. Transport ships lifted off constantly, their holds packed with refugees. Families clutched their few possessions. Children cried. And everyone looked up at the sky, where the battle raged. They could see explosions in the darkness of space. Brief flashes of light that represented weapons, fire, and dying ships. Administrator Walsh stood at the command center, watching the evacuation numbers climb. 12 million evacuated. 13 million. 14 million. Every minute brought more people to safety, and every minute was bought with the blood of the Defiant's crew. How much longer? She asked her deputy. 15 minutes for the last transports to launch. Then another 10 minutes for them to reach minimum safe distance. 25 minutes total. Walsh looked at the display showing the space battle. The small human ship was still there, still fighting against impossible odds. She had never seen such courage, such determination. These people were dying to save her world, and there was nothing she could do to help them. Aboard the Vakrin flagship, war leader Thexus stood on his command deck, rage burning in his chest. The Crimson Sovereign was the pride of the fleet, a ship that had conquered 100 worlds, and now a single small vessel had damaged his communications array and made him look weak in front of the fleet. Thexus was tall even for a Vakrin, his scaled skin dark red and his eyes like burning coals. He had led successful campaigns for 50 years, crushed countless enemies, and never once faced true resistance. The humans were changing that. Status of communications repair? He demanded. 5 minutes until fully operational. His technical officer replied, fear evident in his voice. No one wanted to be the bearer of bad news to Thexus. This human ship has made fools of us, Thexus said. When communications are restored, I want every weapon in the fleet focused on it. I want it vaporized. I want nothing left but atoms. Yes, war leader, the officer said. But even as he gave the order, Thexus felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear exactly. More like uncertainty. The Vakrin had conquered through overwhelming force because no one ever stood against them. But this small ship had stood, had fought, had hurt them. And if one small ship could do this, what could a prepared fleet do? On the Defiant, Peter Collins finally emerged from the maintenance tunnel. He collapsed on the engineering deck, his radiation suit's counter showing 130 rads. Amy and 2 other crew members pulled off his helmet. Get him to medical, Amy said. But Peter grabbed her arm. No time, he gasped. Reactor is stable. You need to watch the coolant pressure. If it drops below 40%, manually engage the emergency backup. Chief, you need treatment, Amy insisted. I'm already dead, Peter said with a weak smile. Radiation got me. But the ship is still alive. Keep her running, Amy. That's an order. He closed his eyes, still breathing but barely conscious. Amy wanted to cry, wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But there was no time. She turned back to her console and kept the engines running, just like her chief had taught her. On the bridge, Daniel received the report about Peter, another good person dying for a mission that seemed impossible. But Peter had bought them time, and Daniel would make sure that sacrifice mattered. Jake, how long until the evacuation is complete? 12 minutes, Captain. The last transports are loading now. 12 minutes. The Defiant had been fighting for nearly 3 hours. The ship had taken more damage than any vessel was designed to survive. They were running on emergency power, had no shields, and were leaking atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. But they had lasted this long. They could last 12 more minutes. All remaining power to engines, Daniel ordered. Lisa, prepare for one final attack run. Lisa turned to him. Daniel, we don't have any weapons left that can hurt them. I know, Daniel said. But we have the ship itself. Kyle, is the flagship's hangar bay still open? Kyle checked his sensors. Yes, sir. They've been launching fighters to try to swarm us. The bay doors are wide open. Daniel smiled grimly. Then that's our target. We're going to ram whatever we have left down their throat. The crew understood what he was planning. A suicide run straight into the enemy flagship. One final attack that would either cripple the Vakran command ship or destroy the Defiant in the attempt. Either way, it would be over. Set course for the flagship, Daniel ordered. Maximum speed. This is our last run. Let's make it count. The Defiant turned toward the Crimson Sovereign one final time. The ship's damaged engines pushed forward, building speed despite the protests from every system. Behind them, the 11 other Vakran ships fired everything they had, trying to destroy the human vessel before it could reach their leader's ship. Energy beams and missiles filled the space around the Defiant. Without shields, every hit struck bare hull. Explosions tore through the ship. Deck 8 was destroyed completely. Weapons, systems went offline. Life support failed in the forward sections. But the ship kept moving forward. In engineering, Amy watched the power levels spike as she pushed the reactor beyond any safe limit. The whole engine room shook with the strain. Alarms screamed warnings that no one listened to anymore. On the bridge, Daniel held onto his chair as the ship disintegrated around him. The view screen showed the Vakran flagship growing larger, the open hangar bay visible now. A dark opening in the massive hull. Distance to target. 800 meters. Lisa called out. Her voice steady even as consoles exploded around her. 600. 400. Fire everything we have left, Daniel ordered. The Defiant's last few weapons launched. Missiles and particle beams all aimed at that open hangar bay. The weapons streaked across the remaining distance and disappeared into the flagship's interior. 3 seconds later, explosions erupted inside the Crimson Sovereign. The Defiant's weapons detonated deep within the flagship, their explosions cascading through multiple decks. The massive ship shuddered as internal systems failed and fires spread. The Defiant rolled away at the last second, engines dying, momentum carrying them past the flagship. The ship went dark as power failed completely. Emergency lights cast everything in red. The only sound was the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groans of stressed metal. Damage report, Daniel said into the silence. All systems offline, Lisa replied. Life support is on emergency backup. We have maybe 2 hours of air left. No power, no weapons, no engines. We're dead, in space. Daniel looked at the view screen, which was somehow still working on emergency power. The Vakran flagship was damaged, fires visible through its hull. But it was still there, still intact. And then, something impossible happened. The Vakran fleet began to move away. The bridge of the Defiant was silent as the crew watched the Vakran fleet retreat. 12 massive warships, including the damaged flagship, were turning away from New Portland and forming up for a wormhole jump. After 3 hours of brutal combat, after all the death and destruction, the enemy was leaving. Are they really withdrawing? Lisa asked, not quite believing what she was seeing. Kyle checked his sensors, which were barely functioning. Yes, ma'am. They're opening wormholes. They're leaving the system entirely. 7. A cheer went up from the surviving bridge crew. But Daniel felt no joy. Only exhaustion and the weight of all they had lost. He opened a communication channel to the entire ship. All hands, this is the captain. The Vakran fleet is retreating. We did it. We held them off long enough. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. You all fought with courage I've never seen before. You saved 15 million lives today. Be proud of what we accomplished. Number. Throughout the dying ship, crew members received the news. In Medical Bay, Helen Carter sat down for the first time in 3 hours and allowed herself to cry. In engineering, Amy Price looked at Peter Collins, who was still breathing but unconscious, and whispered a thank you to him. In damaged sections throughout the ship, survivors hugged each other, overwhelmed by the fact that they were still alive. Jake Morrison's console beeped with an incoming transmission from New Portland. Administrator Walsh appeared on the view screen, tears streaming down her face. Captain Hayes, the last transport just cleared the planet. All 15 million civilians are safe, Every single person we evacuated is because of you and your crew. We owe you everything." Daniel nodded, too tired to speak. Behind Walsh, he could see people celebrating, families reunited on transport ships, children who would grow up because 85 people had decided to stand and fight. "Captain, rescue ships are on their way to you," Walsh continued. "They'll be there in 8 hours. Can you hold out that long?" Lisa checked the emergency systems. "We have about 6 hours of air left. If we ration it carefully and seal off damaged sections, we might stretch it to 7. We'll make it," Daniel said. "We've lasted this long. 8 more hours is nothing." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell quiet again. Around them, the Defiant drifted in space, dark and powerless. The ship that had fought so bravely was now little more than a floating wreck, but it was still there, still intact enough to hold its crew, still a symbol of what they had accomplished. Over the next hours, the crew worked to stabilize their situation. They sealed off sections that were too damaged to save, gathered in areas where life support still functioned, and helped each other survive. Crew members who were engineers assisted with repairs. Those trained in medicine helped Helen with the wounded. Everyone did whatever was needed. Peter Collins died 4 hours after the battle ended. He never regained consciousness after his exposure to radiation in the maintenance tunnel. Amy Price held his hand as he passed, making sure he wasn't alone. His last act had been to save the ship, and everyone aboard knew they owed their lives to his sacrifice. Others had died during the battle too. 14 in total, though that number would rise to 17 by the time rescue arrived. Navigation. Officer Chris Palmer, whose console had exploded on the bridge. Junior engineer Amy Price's assistant, killed when a plasma bolt breached the hull. Lieutenant Kyle Bennett's tactical officer, who had died from his injuries in medical bay. Each death was a loss that the crew felt deeply, but 68 crew members survived. 68 people who had faced the most powerful military force in the galaxy and refused to surrender. 8 hours after the battle, rescue ships from the Defense Force arrived. Medical teams rushed aboard the Defiant to treat the wounded. Engineers assessed the damage and shook their heads in amazement that the ship had stayed together at all. The survivors were evacuated to the rescue vessels, where they received food, water, and real medical care. Daniel was the last to leave the Defiant. He stood on the bridge one final time, looking at the damaged consoles and the blast marks on the walls. This ship had been his home for 3 years. Now it was a tomb for 17 brave souls, and a monument to what desperation and courage could achieve. "Captain, we need to go," Lisa said gently from the airlock. Daniel took one last look around, then followed her to the rescue ship. Behind them, the Defiant remained in orbit around New Portland, too damaged to repair, but too important to destroy. The colonial government had already announced plans to preserve the ship as a memorial. News of the battle spread quickly through human space. The Defense Force released the combat data that Jake Morrison had transmitted during the fight. Military analysts studied every second of the engagement, amazed by the tactics Daniel and his crew had employed. News channels played footage of the small frigate standing alone against a Vakrin fleet, and people across dozens of worlds watched in awe. Captain Daniel Hayes became famous overnight, though he hated the attention. He gave one interview where he made it clear that his crew deserved the recognition, not him. He spoke the names of the 17 who died, making sure the galaxy knew their sacrifice. The Defense Force promoted Daniel to admiral and offered him command of a new fleet. Peter Collins was posthumously awarded the highest honor for his actions in engineering. Lisa Morgan, Kyle Bennett, Helen Carter, Jake Morrison, Amy Price, and every surviving crew member received medals and commendations. But the real impact of the battle was felt across the galaxy. The Vakrin Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been forced to retreat by a single small ship. Other species under Vakrin occupation heard the story and began to hope. If humans could stand against the Empire, maybe they could too. Within the Vakrin Empire itself, war leader Thexus filed his report on the engagement. He described the human ship's tactics, their refusal to surrender, and their effectiveness, despite being completely outmatched. The War Council read his report carefully and came to a disturbing conclusion. For 300 years, the Vakrin had conquered through overwhelming force and the fear it created. They had never faced an enemy who truly resisted. The humans had shown that courage and determination could offset technological superiority. If one small ship could do such damage, what would a prepared human fleet accomplish? The War Council made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month before. They ordered all Vakrin forces to avoid human space until they better understood this new enemy. The empire that had never retreated, never hesitated, was now reconsidering its strategy because of one desperate battle. 3 years passed. Daniel served as Admiral of the Third Fleet, a force of 200 warships designed using the lessons learned from the Defiant's last fight. Lisa became his second-in-command again. Kyle headed the Tactical Planning Division. Amy Price became the youngest chief engineer in the fleet. Helen Carter ran the medical training program that prepared doctors for combat. During those 3 years, humanity prepared for the war everyone knew was coming. Shipyards worked constantly building new vessels. Military academies taught the tactics that the Defiant had pioneered. Millions of young people enlisted in the defense force, inspired by the story of 85 crew members who had stood against the darkness. When the Vakrin Empire finally returned to human space, they found a different enemy than before. The scattered, unprepared colonies had been replaced by a coordinated military force. The Vakrin fleet that entered human territory consisted of 300 warships, their largest invasion force ever assembled. They were met by Admiral Daniel Hayes and the Third Fleet. The battle lasted 3 days and involved over 500 ships on both sides. It was brutal, violent, and unlike anything the Vakrin had experienced before. The humans fought with the same determination that the Defiant had shown, but now they had the numbers and firepower to back it up. The Vakrin were defeated. Not destroyed, but beaten badly enough that they withdrew from human space entirely. It was their first major military defeat in 300 years of conquest. The empire that had seemed unstoppable had been stopped by a species that refused to give up. After the battle, Daniel stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the tactical display. 230 Vakrin ships had retreated. 70 had been destroyed. The human fleet had lost 48 vessels and thousands of crew members. It was a victory, but an expensive one. Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 3 Vakrin-occupied worlds, Lisa reported. They saw the battle, and they're rising up against their occupiers. Daniel nodded. This was what they had really fought for. Not just to defend human space, but to prove that the Vakrin could be beaten. To give hope to all the species that had suffered under their empire. Contact Fleet Command, Daniel ordered. Tell them we're ready to support the liberation efforts. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, thinking about the crew of the Defiant. Peter Collins, who had saved them all with his final act. Chris Palmer, who would never marry the girl he loved. The 14 others, who had died in that desperate fight. They had started something they didn't live to see completed. But their sacrifice had changed everything. There was a memorial above New Portland now, built around the preserved hull of the Defiant. Millions of people visited it every year to see the small ship that had stood alone. The memorial's inscription was simple but powerful. Here rests the USS Defiant and the 17 souls who gave their lives aboard her. Outnumbered, outgunned, and facing certain death, they chose to stand. In standing, they saved 15 million lives and proved that courage can overcome any odds. They taught the galaxy that the size of a ship matters less than the size of the hearts within it. On the anniversary of the battle, Daniel always visited the memorial. He would stand before the names of his fallen crew and remember their fear and their bravery. Remember the impossible choice they had made and how they had changed the galaxy. Young cadets would sometimes approach him there, asking what it was like to be part of such a famous battle. Daniel always told them the same thing. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about doing what was right, even when it seemed hopeless. We were just ordinary people facing an extraordinary situation, he would tell them. We were scared. We knew we would probably die. But 15 million people needed someone to stand between them and destruction. So we stood. That's all any of us can do when the moment comes. Stand up and do what's right, no matter the cost. The cadets would nod and thank him, then go back to their training. They were part of the new generation, inspired by the Defiant's stand to protect humanity and its allies. They carried the lesson that one small ship had taught the galaxy. Courage and determination could change the course of history. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of New Portland as the turning point in galactic history. The Vakran Empire never recovered its reputation for invincibility. Resistance movements spread across occupied worlds. The empire that had conquered 2,000 systems began to crumble, as species after species rose up against their oppressors. And it all started because 85 people on a small frigate decided that some things were worth fighting for. Even when victory seemed impossible, they had stood against the darkness, and in standing, they brought the dawn.